a foundation certificate in trauma-informed practice with children and families, an online certificate offered by the University of Vermont's Child Welfare Training Partnership. This module covers the topic of secondary traumatic stress and was developed by Allison Hendricks of Hendricks Consulting in partnership with the University of Vermont Department of Social Work. By the end of this module, participants will be able to define secondary traumatic stress, describe risk factors as well as signs and symptoms for STS, identify STS assessment tools, describe strategies for addressing STS, including personal, professional, supervisory, and organizational strategies, and cite STS resources for professionals and agencies. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to walk through water without getting wet. Secondary traumatic stress is an occupational hazard for anyone working with trauma survivors. It is unrealistic to expect that we as helpers will not be impacted by the traumas experienced by our clients. This training will help us understand how trauma work impacts us as professionals and individuals, and to learn ways to address this impact so we can keep doing this important work without being overwhelmed by negative effects. Here are some definitions for secondary traumatic stress and vicarious trauma, which can be understood as trauma exposure reactions. These terms are very similar and are used interchangeably at times. Vicarious trauma tends to describe the change in the worldview of a helper after chronic or cumulative trauma exposure, whereas STS can occur as a result of one-time exposure or cumulative exposure to others' traumas. Compassion fatigue is a similar phenomenon, but can also apply to professionals and caregivers who help people in situations that are distressing but not necessarily traumatic. For example, hospice workers or family members caring for a severely mentally ill relative. Compassion satisfaction relates to the ways in which our work can inspire us and how we can feel rewarded by making a difference and be able to help others. For example, we can feel inspired by the resilience of a child overcoming severe abuse and grateful to be a part of the healing process. Vicarious resilience describes how exposure to our clients' resilience in the face of trauma can actually help us providers become more resilient in dealing with adversity and stress. Just as we can be changed in a negative way by the work, we can also experience positive transformations in ourselves through helping others overcome trauma. It is important to note that compassion satisfaction and vicarious resilience do not make us invulnerable to suffering from STS reactions. Helpers often find that they simultaneously rate high on compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction. We will learn more about how to assess our own levels of STS, compassion fatigue, burnout, and compassion satisfaction a little later in the training. Sometimes the terms burnout and STS are used interchangeably, but they are quite different. Burnout can occur in any field of work and is more related to workload. Many of us suffer from STS related to the nature of our work with trauma survivors and also burnout related to high caseloads, paperwork demands, etc. STS and burnout can make us feel as if we are not really fully present in our work. You may have colleagues who seem as if they have checked out due to the cumulative toll of trauma work. This list of top 10 signs you're too stressed is from the Center on Family Homelessness workbook. What About You? A workbook for those who work with others. As you review the list, consider which item or items you relate to the most. Risk factors for STS include repeated exposure to trauma survivors and their stories. The updated criteria for what constitutes a trauma for the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder in the DSM-5 includes experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of traumatic events, including when exposure is work-related. Keep in mind that part of being a good helper involves empathizing with clients and their pain, and yet the skill also puts us at higher risk for secondary trauma. Working with other providers, agencies, and systems can sometimes contribute to stress and feeling a loss of control. Organizational stressors such as layoffs, staff turnover, and productivity demands can also make us more vulnerable to STS. Some helping professionals, such as first responders and child welfare workers, are exposed to primary trauma on the job in addition to secondary trauma. This can exacerbate the impact of the indirect trauma exposure. Many people who enter helping professions also have personal histories of trauma, which can also put them at higher risk for STS if they have not resolved or come to terms with their own trauma. For example, a social worker who grew up in a violent home may be triggered when hearing a client's story of domestic violence and may therefore experience more distress. Personal stressors can also make us more vulnerable to STS. While we cannot avoid stress and change in our personal lives, it is important to be aware of the interaction between work and personal stress so that we can seek out more support or focus on more self-care during these times of high stress. Other factors that can contribute to STS include working with clients with overwhelming problems that can elicit feelings of helplessness or feeling like you are working hard but getting nowhere in the provider. Not every client is ready to engage in services, and yet we, as providers, may put undue pressure on ourselves to succeed in every case. Working with clients who are mandated for services and/or angry about having systems and professionals involved in their lives can be difficult and emotionally taxing. It is important to be aware of agency morale, as negativity and cynicism can make the work more difficult. Professionals working in the field of child maltreatment often find it hard not to be impacted by details of horrific child abuse and may start to question their faith in humanity and may begin to view the world as an unsafe place. STS can have negative impacts on individual providers and on organizations. Have you ever experienced increased conflict or high levels of turnover at your workplace, or any of the other listed impacts? The fact that STS can have such detrimental effects on agency functioning, including high turnover, lower quality of work, lower productivity, and more staff conflict, underscores why it is so important for agencies to acknowledge and deal with STS. We will talk about organizational strategies to address STS later in the training. Signs of secondary traumatic stress include avoidance, intrusive thoughts, hyperarousal, and numbing. These are the same symptoms that our clients exhibit in response to primary trauma exposure. STS symptoms mimic post-traumatic stress symptoms, but are usually less severe. Helpers with high levels of trauma exposure can actually develop PTSD as a result of their work. Although we may feel isolated and alone, STS reactions are very common and expectable in our field of work. It can be difficult to turn off and leave work at work when we are working with people in distress, especially child clients who may be more vulnerable. Providers may worry about their clients and may have intrusive thoughts about their clients or their clients' traumas after work hours. One of the strategies to address STS that we will discuss shortly is to help strengthen boundaries between work and home and to ensure a healthy work-life balance plan. As secondary traumatic stress can be considered an occupational hazard for those of us working with trauma survivors, it can be expected that we will suffer from STS at some point in our careers. It is important to be aware of STS and how we are impacted by our work. Completing a self-assessment, such as the Secondary Traumatic Stress Scale or Professional Quality of Life Scale on a regular basis, perhaps every 6 months, is like giving yourself a checkup. Awareness of our own level of STS can serve as a warning signal so that we can act to address the problem before it becomes debilitating. We recommend that you click on one of the links and complete either the STS scale or the Professional Quality of Life Scale now, or shortly after completing this training. Now we will move into talking about strategies for addressing STS, starting with actions that individual professionals can take. Although it is unrealistic to think that we can work in the field of trauma without having some negative impacts, the good news is that we can enact strategies to help address STS and reduce the negative effects. Awareness and early intervention are essential. Knowing your own limits regarding caseload and types of trauma is important. An example might be that working on a case of severe child abuse of a child that is the same age as your own child might hit too close to home and therefore make it hard to do your best work. Another strategy is regular assessments of STS and self-care and emotional regulation. Pay attention to how you are feeling before, during, and after difficult client encounters. It is also helpful to reframe your thoughts about the work we are doing. For example, at the end of the workday, do you tend to focus on what went well or what did not go well? It can help to try to think about 3 positive things at the end of each day, keeping in mind that it's often the little things that make a big difference. Just listening and making a client feel heard can help tremendously. As Maya Angelou wisely said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Connecting with peers is important, as it helps reduce the sense of isolation and reminds us that we are not alone. Other helpful professional strategies include regular, process-oriented supervision and low-impact debriefing with peers. This means that rather than repeating all the graphic details of the trauma to your peers, it is more helpful to focus on your own feelings and reactions. Give yourself permission to set limits with clients and peers. If we do not take care of ourselves, we will not do a very good job at helping others. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, has been shown to effectively reduce symptoms of compassion fatigue. Now, we will try a mindfulness-based stress reduction activity to give you a sense of how to use these brief exercises during the workday to help manage stress and trauma exposure. This exercise is called a body scan. Please close your eyes. Slowly scan up and down your body for any tension or pain. If you find a tight or sore spot, breathe into the spot until it relaxes. You may imagine healing, white light radiating into the spot. What did you notice? Were you aware of tension spots prior to this activity? Are these the same places where you tend to carry your stress? Our bodies often serve as helpful indicators of stress. Pay attention to your body and physical reactions throughout the workday, particularly when you have difficult encounters related to trauma exposure. Consider massage, stretching, or other strategies to address the physical manifestations of stress. Think about incorporating the body scan or other mindfulness exercises throughout the day. Personal strategies for addressing STS include awareness of one's own warning signs. It can be useful to think about times when you are feeling good and inspired by your work as being in the green zone. The yellow zone indicates warning signs that you are starting to feel the impact of STS. This might include feeling more tired or more irritable than usual. It is important to attend to these warning signs to take steps to address these reactions before you enter the red zone, which indicates severe impact that is impacting your personal and professional functioning and well-being. Think about and write down what your zones look like. How do you know you are in the green, yellow, or red zone? Another strategy is setting good boundaries between work and home, which may include a transition ritual or something you do when you leave work on your way home to put the work behind you. Gratitude or focusing on things for which you are grateful can be a powerful antidote to STS. You can think about or write down 3 things for which you are grateful for each night before going to sleep. This activity has been shown to reduce STS and increase helpers' sense of happiness and their sleep quality. It is helpful to monitor your own self-care practices in various domains to identify any areas that could use more attention. The University at Buffalo School of Social Work's Self-Care Starter Kit includes a comprehensive self-care assessment and planning tools. It is also important to seek support, especially if unresolved personal issues seem to be getting triggered by your work. It is common for those in helping professions to experience the hero complex, which might make us feel like we are not supposed to need professional help because we are the helpers. Remember that we are human, and that asking for help when help is needed is a strength rather than a sign of weakness. Monitoring your own self-care and personal stress is also important, as personal stress can interact with STS to make us feel very overwhelmed. As we move into talking about supervisory strategies to address STS, think about a time when a supervisor did something that helped to reduce your secondary traumatic stress. What did he or she do that was helpful? Now, think about a time when a supervisor did something that was not helpful or heightened your own response to a client's trauma. Supervisors play a key role in helping workers manage trauma exposure reactions. Reflective or process-oriented supervision is effective in helping providers recognize and manage their emotional reactions to trauma work. Reflective supervision makes use of the supervisee's thoughts, feelings, and reactions, and explores the parallel process while also actively engaging the supervisee to identify solutions. Supervisors should recognize and focus on successes and strengths, as well as making sure that workers are not adding to each other's trauma load by sharing too much unnecessary trauma detail in group supervision or meetings. Supervisors also need to attend to their own STS reactions and model good self-care and boundaries for staff. Supervisors can also help advocate for the needs of their supervisees with administrators and ensuring that administrators are educated about STS and how STS can impact staff and agency performance and well-being. As trauma exposure is an occupational hazard in this field of work, organizations have a responsibility to address STS in staff proactively. It is important to consider trauma exposure levels and to make efforts to vary or reduce trauma caseloads when possible. As STS levels increase with the number of trauma cases on a worker's caseload, organizations need to consider what a healthy and sustainable trauma caseload might look like. As supervisors are often at a loss to know how to support staff around STS, specific training on this topic for supervisors as well as staff is key. Many agencies are instituting wellness campaigns to address STS. Workers' locus of control has been shown to impact their level of STS, so including workers in decision-making and giving them some control over their schedule are important organizational strategies. If you are interested in evaluating how STS-informed your agency is, here is a helpful resource. The Secondary Traumatic Stress Informed Organization Assessment, or STSI-OA, evaluates the following 6 areas: organizational resilience building activities, the degree to which the organization promotes a sense of safety, how STS-informed agencies' policies are, how STS-informed administrative practices are, how STS-informed routine agency practices are, and how well the agency evaluates and monitors STS policies and practices. This assessment can be completed by anyone at any level of the organization and can be re-administered to evaluate change over time, such as to assess effectiveness of organizational efforts to better address STS. The STSI-OA also helps to operationalize what STS-informed looks like at an agency level by identifying specific policies and practices that are STS-informed. Results from the STSI-OA can be used to develop strategic plans to focus on areas in which the agency received low scores. If you are a frontline professional, you may want to share the STSI-OA with your supervisors and/or managers. Here are some additional organizational strategies for addressing STS. Providing reflective or process-oriented supervision on a regular basis can help workers manage trauma exposure. Supports for staff, including employee assistance programs and adequate mental health coverage, are also important. Evaluating agency culture and reducing any stigma related to STS is also essential, especially in agencies where toughness is a virtue. Workers need to feel comfortable and safe to express their reactions to trauma work, and talking openly about STS with staff can help reduce stigma. Here are some resources on STS, including websites, blogs, and workbooks. TEND Academy has a variety of resources, including videos and a blog. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network has fact sheets on STS, as well as a speaker series with free webinars on STS. This slide includes a link for an additional workbook on secondary trauma that can be downloaded from the Center on Family Homelessness, as well as some books on STS. This slide contains references cited during the training module. In conclusion, we ask you to consider the following questions to help increase your compassion satisfaction and vicarious resilience. 1. Why did you decide to enter your field of work? 2. What sustains you? 3. Think and write about a particularly rewarding case or work experience. 4. Think about all the clients you have been able to help in the course of your career and the difference you have made in your clients' lives. And 5, what are you grateful for? We recommend that you try to focus on these thoughts frequently, and especially after a hard day. You may want to keep your written responses somewhere tangible in the workplace to enhance your compassion, satisfaction, and vicarious resilience as you continue to make a difference in the lives of families impacted by trauma. Thank you for participating in today's module on secondary traumatic stress.